Hello, it's me, the Kerbanaut here, and today we're going to be going over the very basics of KSP, otherwise known as Kerbal Space, well, it's not otherwise known as it actually is called Kerbal Space Program, but it is abbreviated to KSP. So, when you get the game, and it costs about £15, which is, like, what, $30? 30 something dollars, $26, I don't know, something like that. You can go onto their website. I have a link on my channel. You can actually go visit that if you want. What we're going to do right now though is I'm just going to show you how to fly and how to run KSP in general. So when you get into your game, you can say start game, start new game and all that jazz. That's pretty simple stuff, but when you get to here, this is when it actually gets interesting, maybe a little bit complicated. Not too much, but just a little bit. So we have a few options here. We could go there and you could just launch a ship that you have, and I've got a few saved there. You can click here and this takes you to your map view, and in your map view you can see, well, the map. This is a tracking station. It's not exactly the same as your actual map view when in flight, but it gives you the same basic things. You get to see your solar system and all its planets, and you get to see all the flights that are in progress, including the debris that's floating around, which, by the way, can get very annoying. To get out of it, you just press the back button up here in the top right hand corner. Now, over here is the spaceplane hangar. In the spaceplane hangar you can create ships just as you can in the vehicle assembly building, which we will look at in a second, but in this specific one you must create them sideways because, well, it's a spaceplane hangar and spaceplanes don't take off vertically, do they? No, they start on the runway, and that's what you do. With the space planes, you stick a rocket on the back or a jet or something, and you launch it with its wings, and it flies, and you can fly that in the atmosphere. Sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time actually, you can get it up into orbit as well, but you do usually need an actual rocket, like a fuel engine like this, yeah. That is the basics of the space plane hangar. Otherwise, it's almost exactly the same as the vehicle assembly building, just that it's on its side. So I'll talk about assembling your spacecraft when we get to the vehicle assembly building. Again, you can press exit to get back up to that main screen up here in the top right hand corner. So, as I said, this along here is the runway that you'd use to take off in the spaceplane hangar. This is where you take off with all your rockets that you make in your vehicle assembly building, which will be your main operation base thing. And this is where you make all of your rockets, which is just about, for me anyway, about 90% of the stuff I do is in the vehicle assembly building. Now, I must warn you, I have got a few mods installed. I have a sub-assembly loader, which I will talk about probably in a later episode, and I've got Mechanical Jeb, which, if you know anything about the game, is an autopilot basically. It pilots your ship for you, so you don't have to go through the strenuous task of getting into orbit or getting an encounter with other planets or moons, and that just does it very much for you, and it gives you a lot of helpful information as well. But for right now I'm just going to go over the basic parts. Oh, by the way, I've also got one other mod installed called the Home mod. The Home mod consists of a few parts that act like a base, like you could plant them on the moon, it could be a moon base, etc. And it's got a few things along that line. But the stock parts are all here. You've got your cockpits and your pods and all that, and you've got some not droids. I want to say droids. You know what I mean. Those things. Right now we're just going to go with this. Now I'm now going to show you how to create a basic rocket. For a very basic rocket, not an orbiting rocket, just a very simple thing, you're going to need 4 things, maybe 3 even. Well, 4. Yeah, let's say 4. So yeah, I'll build the rocket first, then we can name it up there. So what you're going to need is your cockpit. Now, for every vessel, every single ship you make, you're going to need a cockpit or an artificial cockpit, or you know what I mean, a droid, as I call them. And then you're going to need a parachute if you are planning on returning to Kerbin or any other planet with an atmosphere, such as Eve. So you can go over, where is it? Utility. There we go. And you're going to pick a parachute. Now there's a variety of parachutes here. These ones are bigger, as you can see, and they really aren't worth the weight on this one. You can use radio mounted parachutes, which again are quite large, and although they're useful, I don't usually use them. I end up just not using parachutes at all whenever I need to use the side ones. But for this small pod, we're going to use this little Mark 16 parachute, and it clicks onto the top there. No finickiness involved. So that's the first part. Well, second part really, if you count the pod. Now we're going to need a decoupler. You may not need a decoupler. It is possible to land your ship without a decoupler, but it always helps to kind of separate your pod from anything else that you have lying around on your ship, so that when you re-enter and, well, return to Earth, you don't have all this junk exploding beneath you when you land. It means you just land nicely. So, we're going to go to structural, and you don't want to use this one. This one is a big one. Again, there's two main sizes in KSP. There's a big size and there's a small size. We're going to use this small size decoupler here. We're then going to go over to our next thing, which is a fuel tank. Now, well, before I get into the fuel tank, let me just explain what a decoupler does. A decoupler separates you from your rocket. That's all it does, and it's in a stage down here, so that when you press the space bar to go into your next stage, the decoupler fires, and you separate from whatever is on the other side of the decoupler. In this case, it's going to be a fuel tank, and then beneath it, a rocket. So, we've got our fuel tank. Pretty self-explanatory. It is a fuel tank. It holds fuel, and you need fuel to fire your rocket. Now, for the smaller rockets, you have a few different options. There's a very small rocket here, which does almost nothing for you, except when you're in space. It's very handy when you're in space because you can change your orbits, and it uses very little fuel and all that because it's a small rocket. But for our purposes right now, we're going to go with one of these two. Now, they're almost exactly the same, except one is a gimbaling engine, which means it can change direction in the way it fires, so that you have a lot more maneuverability, although sometimes that's very not handy and can be very annoying. And then you have another engine which doesn't have gimbaling but has more power. So it's a toss-up. You can either have stability, or in some cases instability and less power, or you can use the one that doesn't have gimbaling and you have no real control of the engine except through its power, and yet it gives you more power. For this example, I'm going to use the gimbaling engine because, well, I don't know, I just like gimbaling engines. I like the idea of being in control. And that draws fuel from the fuel tank. Now, say if you had something else, say if you had something in here. Now, usually, let's choose something that's not an engine. Let's go to, I don't know, freaking this thing. I don't know. Say you had that thing in there. Now, the engine would still get fuel as long as this says fuel crossfeed compatible. You can see down at the bottom of this big box it says fuel crossfeed compatible. That means the fuel can go through this thing to get to somewhere else, to get to the engine, to get to wherever. It's when the thing that's between your fuel and your engine does not have that you have to get a bit worried, and you have to put in fuel lines and such, but I'll go into that in a second. Well, not in a second, probably later on. This is just the very basics. So now you've got your little rocket already, you might want to support it. Oops. You might want to support it. You might want to make it so it won't fall over the launch pad. Usually a good idea. I mean, on this rocket it's very small, and so you would never really need it, but let's do it anyway. It's an explanatory video, and I'm just going to press X here, and that puts the symmetry up to 2, and you can change that to 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or, you know, whatever. I'm going to keep it on 2. And you can see it's now kind of being held up by these things. Following on from our building stage now, we're going to go up to the naming stage. Now the naming stage is what I find very fun, because you can name it anything. You can freaking name it the Big Bullet or bloomin' anything, really. You could call it absolutely anything. But I'm just going to call mine Wee Guy. Like that. Right there. And bam. That's it. And we've now created a rocket and named it. One last thing though, it's usually good to check before you launch your rocket, is to go down to the bottom right hand side over here, and you'll look at your staging. Now staging is incredibly important in a rocket. Most of the time KSP will do the staging for you, and it's usually correct, but in certain circumstances the staging can be very, very wrong, and it makes your rocket extremely hard to fly, or just explode, or just not lift off in the first place. I will show you an example right now actually. You can see if I take this off and put in, say, another fuel tank and another engine. Now I know I'm not putting a thing in there, but this is just for example, and I do this, right? And then I get some more of these, and I put them up here. You'll notice that the support thing for these has been moved up to this top stage, and is not down here with the others. That in effect means that when I launch this and press the spacebar to start up my engine, only these two bottom clamps will unclamp, and I will still be held on the launch pad by these two clamps. And it's only when I get to this final stage will it release these clamps, which is completely useless because on this final stage it's also releasing my parachute. And so what would happen is not only would my engine fire and these things release, but my parachute would open, and so I'd fly backwards and crash into the ground. And therefore, to fix that problem, what you'd want to do is first of all move these two down to the very beginning so that they unclamp with the others. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to change this engine down and stick it on a stage of its own. Now you can press this to add a stage, and you can press this to take away the stage that is on. And what that has now done is it means that when I press the spacebar to start, it'll unclamp these and fire the main engine. I press it again and it unclamps that. I press it again and it fires this engine. I press it one more time and it releases the parachute. And that is the basics of staging. It's a drag and drop system, it's very easy, and you can go over certain things and you'll see them highlighted, and so it's easy enough to find what you're doing. And it's usually a good idea to have a look at your staging before you go and fly. What I usually do is I just kind of have a wee peek at the staging and then sort it out on the launch pad, but that's because I'm a bad person and I don't usually remember. Right, we're done. That's us. Just take away that stage right there. We're finished. We've finished creating our tiny little, very simplistic KSP rocket. Now, here comes the fun part. Or, maybe, if you only like building it, it's the less fun part. I personally enjoy flying the rocket. It's usually, you know, the goal of creating a rocket is to fly it. But, let's just get going. So we're going to say save up here. Oh, you have all your options up here. That is not a thing as I said before. But yeah, you can save it, and then up here, green button, launch. Now, I did launch one earlier. I was just playing about, and I called it Little Green Men, and you can see it's got debris on the launch pad. That debris is just these things, because these things do not go into the air with you. They stay on the launch pad, and so it's classed as debris, because this is part of the design. It stays there. It's anything that's not controlled from that spacecraft is called debris, and you'll see when I decouple this will become debris. What we're going to do is we just clear the launch pad, which gets rid of the debris, just deletes it altogether, and puts us on the launch pad. You can see here, we're on the launch pad. There's the vehicle assembly building, there's that map view thing I was talking about, and the spaceplane hangar. It's all here, and you've got your water tower and your blah-de-blah. You get the idea. Now, here are the basic controls. It's a WASD system, and it's also got Q and E for, I don't know what you call it, turning, for like a roll. And it's to throttle up you press shift, and to throttle down you press control. I don't know what the things are for Mac users. Unfortunately, I don't own a Mac. I would love to. If you want to send me a free Mac, that would be brilliant. Otherwise, let's just get going. So we're going to throttle up here, but importantly, what you have to remember to do is to turn on SAS. SAS is a stability assist system, I believe, or something like that. And what it does is it stops you from rolling over or going into an insane spin, etc. Now there is another option you'll see on the left hand side of this thing. It's got RCS. Now RCS uses little thrusters that you can attach to this, and it assists the SAS to a great extent. Unfortunately, it does use a monopropellant, which is basically fuel for the RCS system. So now that we've got SAS enabled, and we are going to keep an eye on this thing down here, and we want to keep it pointing where it is so that it goes up. Okay? Press space to start in 3, 2, 1, launch! And there we go, we've started. Now you can see we're flying up very, very quickly, and you have a look down here and you can see your fuel decreasing rapidly. Now in the low atmosphere, I don't like to have my throttle up too high because drag is implemented, and so you're pushing against all that air, and it really, you know, isn't good. Oh, what have I done? What have I done? I don't know. I don't know what I did, but I stopped the engine. Okay, right, so, we're going all over the place. I'm trying to keep it in the middle of this wee blue ball at the bottom here, and you do that by pressing the AWSD keys, and that's us out of fuel, right there. So, you can see we got up to a reasonable height here, 12,000 meters, and drag and weight and all that is taking effect, and seeing as this ship is top heavy, we're gonna fly downwards, I think. I assume. Assuming is usually bad. So, I'll just show you about this debris thing I was talking about earlier. Detaching, and you see that there? We got debris. That is now counted as debris as it is no longer controlled by us. If I was to double click on that or press the square bracket key, I can then switch to that, and I can't control it in any way whatsoever, so there's no point in switching to it. Unless, of course, you want to get rid of it, and then you switch to it and then press end flight, but I'll show you that in a second. So, we've detached, we're falling towards the Earth, and to stop our impending doom, it would be sensible to deploy our parachute. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna wait till that's like that, and this is an atmosphere bar up here. When this little arrow gets to about there, our parachute will open, but it will only open if it is deployed. So, we press the space bar, parachute is deployed, but it's not open. It's when it opens that we really start to slow down. Well, not start to slow down, we slow down almost immediately. And then we hit the ground at a very mere, maybe 5 meters a second, which is definitely not fatal. And it saves us a lot of hassle. So you see we're getting closer to the bottom of this atmosphere bar, and you'll see the parachute start to open, well, not start to open, it'll fly open at high speeds. We can turn SAS off now. If I forgot to mention how to turn on and off SAS and RCS, SAS to turn on is T, the key T, and RCS is the key R. And I believe you can toggle them with the key F. So there you go, we've just opened it up there. It's just bellowed open, and you can see we're down to about 6.3 meters per second. G-force is pretty low, but it did spike there because we slowed down rapidly, and so the G-force went up. We can speed this up by kind of thing up here called time warp. Time warp basically speeds everything up. When you're within the atmosphere, or even if you're close to a planet or something and you want to speed up in a specific way, you can do so with the physical time warp, which speeds it up and you still have control and you know everything goes fine. But it sometimes wrecks your massive ships, I've been told. I've never had any problem with it with larger ships myself, but I understand how it can affect larger ships. It's a physical time warp, which means that it can damage things. And shadow equals boom, we're on the ground, there you go. And you can see we've gone from being in physical time warp ability to full time warp ability. This is just normal time warp, and you can warp around at insane speeds. You would do that if you're going around the sun, usually. You would probably never go higher than that. So, that's us on the ground. Now, about this end flight thing. You press escape, and that puts you onto the pause game, and you say end flight right here. What that does is it stops your flight, deletes the craft, and ends the flight, and that's it. And you're done. And it gives you all your little results, so you can see we had liftoff, and then we had a separation of that stage, and then we can see after that we separated, everything fell to the earth, and then we landed. And this gives us some stats, and you can go back to the space center, which is the screen. You can just kind of see everything, the home screen, and then you get the tracking station, which is that map view that we saw. And then we go back, we could go to the vehicle assembly building, which is where we built our ship, or we could just go back to the launch pad and restart the flight again and see what we could do. So why not, we can do that again, but this time I'll show you crashing into the ground at high speed, because no Kerbal Space Program video is complete without some kind of insane explosion. So let's do that. Let's just fly ourselves wildly into the ground. Here we go. Say goodbye to all your fellow friends, Mr. Jebediah Kerman. It is your time to die. There we go, and that is the explosion effect that is seen, and you can see that's debris on the launch pad over there. I believe I've covered everything in this video, all the basics anyway. If I have failed to mention some of the very basic things, please feel free to leave it in the comments and I can make a video about it again, and it can be a part 2 to this. If I have mentioned everything, then I feel very happy, because it seems that I've accomplished my task. So, we're now going to end this flight and go to the tracking station. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I've covered all the basics, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.